I really wasn't expecting to make this kind of video today, but as I woke up, I checked on Twitter and we finally got the official announcement of the PlayStation 5 as well as the launch window. So I guess with that information out there, it's time to discuss the future of the next Dragon Ball game. With the PlayStation 5 coming out in holiday 2020, we can now finally formulate when we can expect to see the next Dragon Ball game, whether it be Dragon Ball Xenoverse 3 or just another type of Dragon Ball fighting game. And when you think about it, it actually makes sense now as to why we still haven't received a brand new fighting game after Dragon Ball FighterZ, because naturally so, when you release a new console, you want games to go along with it. So instead of them focusing on a fighting game release next year, we're instead getting Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, which I'm fairly certain will be a great game, but then it gives them a bit more time to work on the next Dragon Ball game to be on the next generation console. Now, with how successful the Xenoverse series has been, I would genuinely be surprised if they did not make a Xenoverse 3 for the PlayStation 5. But there is also a downside to that, and it's the fact that we've received so many characters in these DLC packs that what would they really have to offer if they were to make a Xenoverse 3? As of right now, there's not really that many characters or stages that can get anybody hyped for Xenoverse 3, at least in my opinion, because the fact that we've received 9 DLC packs for Xenoverse 2, which honestly speaking makes no sense, because with that many characters, you could have saved a good portion of that and added that in the sequel, Xenoverse 3, but instead, they're cramming it all within Xenoverse 2. So I don't know who else they could potentially add to get anybody hyped for that game, or at least in terms of characters. But then there is also the flip side, which would be them branching out of the norm and not really sticking with just the anime, because we can start getting what if characters, we can start getting manga characters like Moro, stuff like that. If they give us those type of characters, then I can absolutely see them formulating a good list of characters to add into Xenoverse 3. But of course, there are more pressing matters than characters that would need to be refined in the sequel, and one of the biggest things would be the internet stability, because quite frankly, the netcode in the Xenoverse series has been one of the weakest parts of the entire series. Both Xenoverse 1 and Xenoverse 2 have had subpar PvP connections, and it's safe to say that if Xenoverse 3 or whatever the next fighting game may be doesn't fix that issue, then the longevity of that game will probably go downhill fairly fast. Granted, with Xenoverse 2, there were a lot of people that stuck by the game, and it's the reason why the game lasted so long. But in a general retrospect, if that internet connection or connection stability is not good, I significantly doubt people are going to stick with it as long as they did with Xenoverse 2, and a prime example of that is Jump Force. Granted, I mean, Jump Force had a plethora of issues, but I digress. But the real question is, how does this relate to the PlayStation 5? Because as of right now, we're still on the PlayStation 4. We're still on this current console generation. Well, I can't believe I really have to make this topic, but I had to deal with it when Xenoverse 2 came out, so I'm gonna have to make sure I get this out early before it gets to that point. Let's put things into perspective. So back in June 2008, we received Dragon Ball Z Burst Limit for both the PS3 and the Xbox 360, but the PS2 was still around and it was still selling fairly well. So we got a new game in November of 2008 called Dragon Ball Z Infinite World. Fast forward all the way to February 2015, and we finally received Dragon Ball Xenoverse on not only the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, but at the time, the next generation consoles, the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. Everything was all fine and good until we fast forward to October 2016 when Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 released, but it only released on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and that's where controversy began. What was erupting from the community at the time was the fact that they wanted Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 to also be on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, but they also failed to realize, or at least at the time, that the developers were moving on to something bigger and better. Long story short, it was time to let that console generation die. But it's hard for people to do so when the player base is exponentially large. And the unfortunate truth is that we're more than likely gonna have to deal with that all over again starting the end of next year. There are only two options that we can really expect to see come the next console generation, and that is either we're going to get one more Dragon Ball fighting game that will be on both the new generation and on this current generation, or we just get the next game to be on the new generation and this current generation gets left behind. And honestly speaking, it's kind of weird to know that this current console generation is now about to be old news, because personally speaking, I got my PlayStation 4 on day one back in 2013, and it always felt like a new premium device, but fast forward 6 years later, it feels old. It doesn't feel as fresh, naturally so because time has passed, but it's insane because console generations usually last about 10 years, but this console generation is only going to last 7 before we move on to the next one. But since that's the way the business world works, it's time for us to get ready to move on. That's why I'm making this video, because not only just for Dragon Ball fans, but more than likely for any gamer who has a particular series they currently love on either the PS4 or the Xbox One, because note that if the PlayStation 4 releases next year, the next Xbox is releasing shortly after, or shortly before, who knows. We have an entire year to be able to get ready to save money to be able to afford the next generation consoles. And then after that point, we can finally start preparing to get the next Dragon Ball game. Or heck, for all we know, it could be a launch title. And the last thing I would want to see is a lot of people who love Dragon Ball get left behind until they're able to get the console, while they have the opportunity now to save money and prepare for the launch of the PlayStation 5. When it comes down to it, at the end of the day, I really don't believe that the next Dragon Ball game after Dragon Ball Z Kakarot should be on the PlayStation 4 or Xbox One. Granted, the player bases are significantly larger than what the next generation consoles will be, or at least at that time, but it doesn't mean that the developers should stay back on the current generation instead of taking advantage of the next generation to try to get people to buy those consoles, and naturally so for them to earn money. All good things come to an end, and I think that right now might be that time for the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. It's finally time for us to get ready for the next generation of consoles. I know for a fact I'm gonna try to get a PS5 on day one, so that way I can be ready for all the awesome games that comes out, as well as the next Dragon Ball game. But I do want to know you guys' thoughts in the comment section below. With the PlayStation 5 and the next Xbox coming out fairly soon, are you guys even ready for this next generation of gaming to happen? Like, let me know in the comment section below. Again, I really do want to see what they bring to the table for the next Dragon Ball fighting game, whether it's a Xenoverse 3, which is honestly something I would prefer to see, or if it's a brand new experience entirely, which for all we know could be entirely better than the Xenoverse series as a whole. But I still want to know you guys' thoughts in the comment section below. With that being said, I'm Ndukauba, like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.